Ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome you all to our a very special occasion tonight. I am Hüseyin Alptekin from SETA and from Medipol University, and I will be the moderator for today's discussion, for today's panel presentations. Today, we will be discussing the Arab Spring and how it impacted the Arab world and how it is being carried on, and how we see so different, so varying outcomes and very different trajectories in different parts of the Arab world. And today we have very distinguished presenters and speakers with us. I will introduce them in more detail before their respective speeches. But right now, just to give some heads up, we will have our very own member of SETA, Professor Muhittin Ataman. We will start with his keynote speech. And then we will have Tawakkol Karman, who is the recipient of Nobel Peace Prize in 2011. And she will be our keynote speaker for the night. And after Ms. Karman concludes her discussion, her speech, we will start our panel with three very distinguished panelists, who are Sinan Hatahet, then Emadeddin Badi, and Ahmet Uysal. And I will introduce each speaker in more detail before their respective speeches. But now, please let me introduce Professor Muhittin Ataman, who will do the introduction and speech, the first keynote speaker of the night. Professor Ataman graduated from the Faculty of Political Science in the Department of International Relations at Ankara University. He earned his MA at Central Oklahoma University and his PhD at the University of Kentucky in 1999. He worked as a faculty member afterwards in Abant İzzet Baysal University until 2014, and he is currently a faculty member of the Faculty of Political Science in the Department of International Relations at Social Sciences University in Ankara. Currently, he serves as SETA's Director of Foreign Policy Studies and conducts academic research on Turkish foreign policy, Middle East politics, and the Gulf politics. Ataman is also the editor-in-chief of Inside Turkey, a journal published by SETA Foundation. And now, please, let me give the mic to Professor Muhittin Ataman.
Hello, everyone, all who listens to us on different digital platforms. I welcome you all to this timely and relevant panel entitled 10 Years After the Arab Spring, Where Are We Now? First of all, let me thank SETA Brussels for organizing this webinar. Second, I thank the distinguished speakers for contributing to this panel. It has been 10 years since the eruption of the Arab Spring, that is, the Arab insurgencies and revolutions. We all agree that the Arab Spring, the Arab insurgencies and revolutions, is a significant turning point in the history of the Arab world and the Middle East region. That is, at the beginning of the events, there was a great hope for comprehensive positive changes in the Arab world. As a matter of fact, many Arab states have successfully made democratic elections and formed new governments. Unfortunately, it did not last. Thanks to some regional and global powers, the course of the event was turned into an Arab winter in almost 2.5 years. A counter-revolutionary wave of events took back most of the gains of the Arab Spring. However, a second wave of popular demonstrations and mass protests hit the Arab world in 2019. That is, the Arab Spring has not ended yet. It will continue probably until it brings some meaningful changes to the region. In my presentation today, I want to focus on two different factors. First, I want to point out the impact of the Arab Spring in the region. Then I will briefly analyze Turkey's reaction to the Arab Spring and Turkey's changing policies towards the Arab world. I think there are three significant results and impacts of the Arab Spring for the region. First of all, the Arab insurgencies and revolutions have shaken the Arab world and eventually terminated the Arab world itself. Today, unfortunately, there is no political Arab world. All states which are known as traditional carriers of Arab nationalism, such as Egypt, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Libya, Tunis, and Sudan, have lost their political and military leverage in the region. Nowadays, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates have been trying to represent this declined Arab world. These two states do not have necessary political institutions. They don't have required military might and ideological discourse to lead the Arab world. They have nothing but petrodollars, which is not enough to be considered as real middle powers or lead the Arab world. Second, the Arab insurgencies and revolutions has changed the psychology of the Arab streets. It dramatically increased political awareness among the Arab peoples, which will influence, to me, the future of the regional politics in midterm and long-term periods. For instance, there is now a Saudi diaspora throughout the Middle East region and the Western world. There is an interesting diversification within the Saudi society. Although the large part of the society still belongs to the traditional tribal and religious institutions and connections, a large segment of the Saudi society declares themselves as liberal, reformists, democrats, nationalists, and even seculars. Sooner or later, these societal groups who want change in domestic politics and people who live in other countries will have significant impact on the political developments in their respective home states. In this context, an interesting case is Muhammad Ali, who is a businessman turned into a social media figure and who lives in exile in Spain, has become a key player in the popular demonstrations in Egypt in 2019. And these are not the two only examples, and for sure, this can be said for all other Arab countries. Third, the power vacuum in the Arab world has provided a perfect atmosphere for the state of Israel. Probably the only net winner of the Arab Spring is Israel, since all other countries, Arab or non-Arab states alike, paid certain amount of costs. After the traditional heavyweight Arab states have lost their powers, Israel was freed from a potential threat in the region. Almost all Arab states began to prioritize challenges and problems in their respective domestic affairs. Israel found itself in an unbelievable comfortable position since there is no Arab state to challenge the anti-Palestinian policies of the Israeli state or to defend the right of the Palestinian people. Additionally, Israel, together with the Trump administration in the United States, has improved its relations with certain regional states. That is, it has formalized and normalized its relations with dependent states such as Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, and has formed a new alliance in the region, which is known as the Alliance of the Globe. So when we come to the impact of the Arab Spring on Turkey, we see that there are two main sub-periods that we can focus on. The first one is between 2011 and 2013. That is the real Arab Spring period. But then, starting with 2013, the middle of the year, with the military coup in Egypt, the Sisi coup in Egypt, the spring was turned into an Arab winter, and it also directly influenced Turkey's perspective towards the region. Recently, Turkey has emerged as a regional leader in the Middle East during the post-Arab Spring. Turkey began to effectively intervene into the regional crisis and became a game-changer power in the region. Turkey has followed a regional policy based on the following factors. First, Turkey has been supporting gradual changes in the region, and therefore it has been supporting powers of change. In response, some regional and global actors, such as the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and some Western countries, they began to isolate Turkey from the Arab world. Therefore, when regional and global players began to intervene into the regional crisis, Turkey has changed its regional policy. It has restructured its policy from a heavily humanitarian approach to a security perspective, since many actors began to directly threaten Turkey's territorial integrity and political independence. For this purpose, Turkey began to mobilize its hard power and to play a realpolitik-centered game. Second, Turkish regional perspective differs significantly from the regional perspective of many regional and global powers. While Turkey has been supporting the regional peoples and democratic developments, the other side, which is represented by a large coalition of states, has been supporting authoritarianism and despotism in the Arab world. These conflicting perspectives are witnessed in almost all regional issues, such as the Syrian, Libyan, and Qatari crisis. In Syria, while Turkey has been supporting the mainstream opposition, which is mainly represented, has been representing the Syrian people, these states, they have been supporting the Assad regime. In Libya, Turkey has been supporting the UN-recognized government of the GNA, led by Sarraj, while the other side has been supporting the putschist, despotic, and authoritarian personality of Haftar, which is a proxy. And similarly, all these states have been just ignoring the most recent developments in the Palestinian-Israeli issue, and Turkey remained alone, challenging these unilateral steps taken by the Israeli government and the Trump administration. The alliance of the globe, led by Israel, the United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia, attempted to punish Qatar in 2017, and Turkey one more time has broken the game and intervened into the crisis on the side of the legitimate Qatari government. Third, Turkey has been supporting the status quo of the regional international border. That is, Turkey has been supporting territorial integrity of all countries in the Arab world. Turkey does not want the implementation of Sykes-Picot version 2, that is a second partition of the Arab world. Turkey does not support the creation of artificial and mini-states in the region. Fourth, Turkey claims that the solution of regional crisis is possible only at the regional level. That is, regional mechanisms must be used for the solution of the regional problems. The intervention of global powers complicates the issues rather than solving them. Fifth, the Arab world has lost its vulnerable institutions. Turkey wants to contribute to the reconstruction of the state institutions in the Arab world, especially in Syria and in Libya. And I believe that institutionalization is a precondition of normalization and democratization in the Arab world. Last but not the least, Turkey has been supporting the newly emerged Arab diaspora and opposition. Turkey began to host a large Arab diaspora and opposition figures within its borders. Different Arab opposition groups living in Turkey has been trying to change domestic politics of their respective countries. However, doing that, Turkey will significantly contribute to these reforms, which will contribute to the democratization of the region. When I say democratization, I mean that is the representation of the popular will in the political administration. And I think the process will continue. So the game is not over yet. For sure, any artificial dependent proxy actors are destined to lose in the region. And thank you very much for listening to this presentation.
Thank you, Professor Ataman, for your introductory speech and for your comments on Turkey's perspective on the process of the Arab Spring. And now I am turning to our keynote speaker for the night, Ms. Tawakkol Karman. But please let me introduce her before she starts her speech. Tawakkol Karman was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2011 in recognition for her non-violent struggle for democracy and her advocacy for women's rights in Yemen. Unfortunately, Karman has been imprisoned on a number of occasions for her pro-democracy, pro-human rights protests. Amongst Yemen's youth movement, she is known as the mother of the revolution, the Iron Woman, and the lady of the Arab Spring. She is a human rights activist, journalist, politician, founder of the Peaceful Youth Revolution Council, and the founder of Tawakkol Karman International Foundation. Time magazine described her as a torchbearer of the Arab Spring and named her both one of the 100 most influential women defining the last century and one of the most rebellious women in history. She is now a board member of the Facebook Oversight Board and Nobel Women Initiative. And Ms. Karman, please, we are ready to listen to your speech now. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. First of all, I would like to express my happiness to be with you, SETA, and your audience to talk about 10 years after the Arab Spring and future prospects. Arab Spring revolutions, as you know, were an inevitable response to a set of circumstances and factors. There were no democracy and prosperity in the Arab world. On the contrary, Arab countries were blessed with widespread corruption, repression, violation of human rights and freedom and indignities. Let us, remember that there was a very important, still an important question before the Arab Spring revolutions. This question was, why don't the Arabs revolt? So indeed, demands and the needs were something familiar during the past decades, and it is not, a fresh conspiracy as allegedly, claimed by the dictatorial regimes. It was important for Arab people to revolt for good governance through a peaceful transition to democracies that, guarantee the rotation of power and the non-inheritance of, power. Also to ensure respect of human rights and public freedoms, to all citizens and non-citizens, regardless of, their political and regional identities. No one wants to live under a repression regime, even if it's, a matter of the, hospitality. So after the Arab Spring, during the 3 years that followed the Arab Spring in 2011, Yemen, Egypt, and Tunisia witnessed transitional government, and its people lived with absolute freedoms and would have continued if not the counter revolutions and coups that came as a result of the alliance of remnant of the despotic regimes with Saudi Arabia and the Emirates under a shameful and painful Western blessing and complacency. As we all know, the capital of the counter-revolutions, and here I mean, Riyadh, Abu Dhabi, and also Tehran, owing to their, huge wealth, international allies, and affiliated anti-change groups seek to thwart the Arab Spring, demonize the revolution, and tarnish the image of those advocating and defending human rights and freedoms by using enemy propaganda, military coups, civil wars, chaos, terrorism, and supporting, of course, the overthrown regimes. Saudi Arabia, especially Saudi Arabia, along with the UAE, decided to confront the revolution in the Arab Spring countries by sponsoring the coup in Egypt, engaging and supporting Haftar's militia in Libya, funding the counter-revolution in Yemen to bring down the state through the Houthi militia, and that is something strange in the beginning, and later waged, the war on Yemen. And as you know, that Houthi militia also has, support from Iran from another hand. So with all that, I always say that, or our dreams for freedom, will not fade away, just, as revolutionaries don't forget their revolution, people also do not give up their dreams. So these facts have proven, to be valid and solid as history tells, Arab people, Arab Spring people, and Yemen itself, after all this, devastating war and all this, conspiracy against Yemen is too strong to be broken by, Houthi militia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, or UAE. Yemen will not be defeated. Arab Spring will not be defeated. Whoever seek, to do evil things to Yemen or to Arab people will sink into, its stand and fall of, it's high altitudes. So as I said, at the heart of this, of this raging battle between people who wants democracy and between dictators and their powers behind them, the Arab Spring is defamed and unfairly blamed for chaos and internal wars, while the truth is that the masterminds of counter-revolution have ignited wars everywhere, fearing that the Arab region would finally enjoy democracy and freedoms. Some ruling families around us, around the region, with a tight hold, over countries, and people would never accept to allow the region witness, a democratic, prosperity. It is unfair to blame the revolutionaries. It is unfair to blame Arab Spring, and this peaceful, revolution. We are the people in this region are the victim of those dictators, of those counter-revolution behind them, and of the silence or conspiracy of the Western. So, and blaming the victim is a reward for the perpetrators. These revolutions were ethical and an imperative necessity, and will continue in rounds and rounds until they cross with their people to the brink, to the freedom, democracy, and dignity. the dreams of our people. Still, we are now in the 10th anniversary of our people. We didn't lose our dream for democracy, for freedom, for good governance, for accountability, for rule of law. So the dream of our people will not die, and our struggle will continue as long as there are countries of corruption, tyranny, and failure. There will be revolution that will not exclude anyone from the Atlantic Ocean until the Arabian Gulf. Revolutions will take many forms, but the goal is one, and the struggle is the same. So yeah, this is the most important thing that I want to tell you about Arab Spring, and see how when some thought that the Arab Spring had died, and that our people dreams of freedom were dying. The region witnessed the two, after all the chaos that happened in Yemen, in Syria, in Libya, and even in Egypt. So the region witnessed two greatest revolutions in Sudan and in Algeria. It also witnessed uprising in Lebanon and in Iraq. So this is a very evidence that people didn't give up, and because the coronavirus that stopped the people from continuing their demonstration against their sectarian regime or dictatorial regime, the revolution would have been able to bring down the corrupt and failed sectarian regimes in Iraq and in Lebanon, and certainly they revive after the end of the pandemic. At the end, I want to tell you that the toughest lesson we learned in the Arab Spring is that Western regimes are not concerned with the human rights issues in our Arab region. Rather, they prefer dictators over any democratic governments, and by doing so, they act in a way that denies all the principle that Western civilization has adopted or called for and established. I'm talking about here, it's very important to talk about I'm talking about regimes, not about people. So now we are seeing what happened in America. We all followed the American election, and so how the outgoing US president Donald Trump refused the election result and made efforts to refuse this election result. And when he failed, he resorted to inciting his supporters to carry out the coup, and like the same thing what happened in Egypt, but there was the American realized the enormity of what happened, and therefore forced Trump to hand over power. So democracy have proven that it needs constant support and faith from the people and state institutions. And this is exactly what we also need in our region, in Arab region. We need to be empowered to protect democracy system and to protect democracy institutions that guarantees freedom and the right of expression. So finally, the 10 years ago, millions of Arabs, drew up a roadmap to get out of today's mess. The repressive regimes, however, refused this map. But despite it all, I am sure that the waves of the Arab Spring will continue. That the way it will continue to break out until there is no one dictator left to threaten our lives and to threaten our freedom and to threaten our democracy. Arab Spring is power confined project to end. Rather, it is a dream of freedom, democracy, and national dignity. This means that whatever happens is undefeatable, as tyrants live much less than people. So absolutely, the victory will be with the dreams of people in Arab region for freedom, democracy, and rule of law.
Thank you, Ms. Karman, for this very inspiring an encouraging speech you just delivered. And unfortunately, there are many challenges and many barriers for the people of the Middle East. And Ms. Karman just summarized us very briefly what these people stood for. In the Arab Spring, she mentioned about the difficulties of this process, but also she concluded that no matter what happens, no matter what sorrows were felt by the people, there is still hope for change and for a good change. Thank you, Ms. Karman. And now we will start our panel with three very distinguished panelists today. Just a very brief note before we start the discussion. We will have three speakers tonight in the panel, and each of them will have 15 minutes of time to deliver their speech to you. And also, while listening to them on your social media or on YouTube, please feel free to write your questions with respective issues that they are covering. And also, please specify which speaker you are directing your question to. And after all three speakers complete their speech, then we will have the Q&A session, and I will read your questions from the comments section, and I will direct them to the respective speakers. And with that, please let me present the first panelist of the day, who is Dr. Sinan Hatahet. Sinan Hatahet is a senior fellow researcher in Omran Center for Strategic Studies and the Wartime and Post-Conflicts in Syria program in the European University Institute. He is a consultant advising a number of think tanks and research centers on Syria and the Middle East. His research is concentrated on governance and local administration, political economy, Kurdish political movements, and the new regional order in the Middle East. Hatahet holds a PhD degree in cybersecurity from the University of Technology of Compiègne. And he will right now present his ideas for the Arab Spring with a focus on Syria. Mr. Hatahet, please.
Thank you, Hussein Bey. And thank you, SETA, also for hosting us. And I would also like to thank all people present on this webinar. I'm afraid I'm going to have a little bit change of tone and from the very inspiring speech given by Ms. Tawakkol, and bring in a more realistic tone to this panel. And maybe this is due to the discourse of the Syrian revolution and how it evolved in the last 10 years. And I would like to remind you, I would like to take this occasion to remind you that the Syrian revolution started with liberal demands, asking for reform, regime change, indeed, but all within the framework for asking freedom, equality, and fraternity. And we also add, a lot of people add the fourth major component, which is dignity. And this is a term that we find across and all the revolution of the Arab Spring. However, we can also witness that these liberal demands have been quickly caught up by other pressing grievances. For example, in Syria, we've seen that traditionalists who felt under assault by Ba'ath socialist policies also joined the uprising for different demands. We also saw the rural population who felt betrayed by Bashar al-Assad, abandonment of his father's alliances with the periphery against the Sunni urban community, also joining this revolution. And the same applies on ethnic groups such as Kurds, Assyrians, and also Turkmen. And this complex set of grievances and also demands has only revealed the level of dysfunction the social contract in Syria was facing with, and quickly, what started as a democratic transformation transformed or into something much bigger, a challenge actually to this concept of the nation state. And here I will also maybe allude to the comment made by Muhittin Hoja in his keynote speech when he said that Turkey is supporting the institutionalization of the Arab countries ongoing an uprising and revolution. And he mentioned Syria, and that also Turkey strive to maintain the integrity, the territorial integrity of the country. And here is the first dilemma: how can we claim to institutionalize the Syrian state, and how can we claim to protect the territorial integrity of Syria, while all of these are synonym of maintaining the Syrian regime in power? Because this is one of the major issues that each revolution of the Arab Spring has faced early on, that the state, the nation state that has been created and established by the post-World War I dynamics have created a central state under the regime, under the control of the political regimes, that is taken hostages by these political regimes, and it is quasi impossible to preserve them while demanding regime change. And if the Syrian revolution has missed a golden opportunity to succeed against Bashar al-Assad in 2013, when he used chemical weapons against the civilians in Eastern Ghouta, and the famous red line was crossed, the famous Barack Obama red lines were crossed, and didn't act upon it, we could spend many days and debating what would have happened if actually Obama has, intervened. We would have most probably seen a crumble in Damascus and a quick overthrow of Bashar al-Assad. But what would have come next? Would have the Syrian revolutionary forces were capable of maintaining the state's institution? Most probably not because of the fault or the lack of capacity, even though this exists and we must acknowledge, but because the state has been built to not survive any regime change. So for any regional actors, also international actors, but in this case, let's focus on Turkey, who is a major ally of the Arab Spring, and maybe the last one, maybe the last standing man today on the regional scene. How can we claim to protect the integrity of the Syrian revolution, territorial integrity? Same goes also for Libya, same goes for Yemen, without hindering the Syrian the political regime's capacity to survive. So here we didn't find any answers. We often rely on political negotiations. We've seen this ongoing in Syria since 2014. For 6 years, the Syrian opposition have sat with the Syrian regime in Geneva, in different formats, with different also faces and names from the Syrian opposition, sometimes diluting it and also bringing in figures who are close to the regime in order to facilitate and just to move forward the negotiations. But even then, we couldn't reach such a resolution. So I think one thing that we need to make sure that there is no quick wins, unfortunately, in the Syrian case, but I can also say the same about the Arab Spring. There is no quick solutions. There is no quick wins. What we are going to witness is a more generational change and a grassroots movement, bottom to up, where we see communities taking into hands their own destiny and reorganizing themselves. So at the same time, they also redefine the social contracts and also the relationship with the neighbor communities. And here comes, a glimpse of hope, at least from what we have seen in Syria, with the establishment of different forms of local initiatives, either for administration or for civil society. We've seen the establishment of local councils. We've seen also the eruption and the establishment of a wide Syrian social society organizations that are not only engaged into humanitarian aid, but also engaged into governance, into accountability, capacity building, restoring livelihoods. And all of these initiatives are grassroots initiatives. And the hope is how we can see these initiatives close in together and build a network that can later on evolve into a national scene. And one of the great successes, for instance, that Turkey had created in northern Syria is that it has created the safe haven for these local communities to flourish and to build over this kind of experience. We've seen this in northern Aleppo and also in Idlib since the recent intervention of the Turkish army to ensure that de-escalation zones are installed. We've seen local communities are not only taking things into hands, but they are also rejecting forms of radicalization. They are re-establishing a form of order, and they are all doing all of this from a culture that is loyal to the Syrian and to the Syrian aspirations, Syrian people aspirations. There is no quick solutions. Again, I must insist. It is an accumulation of these small successes and how we can build over them. That is the hope, in my opinion. And if we look today at the outcome of the Syrian revolution, it is very easy to be pessimistic. Half of the Syrian population have been displaced. Half of them have fled to neighboring countries, and the other half has been displaced internally and left their homes to join safe havens. The Syrian rural regions are completely destroyed. The Syrian economy is also destroyed. And today, the Syrian regime is only able to rule by force, and by the lack of alternatives, credible alternatives, at least at this stage. So if we want to judge the Syrian revolution only by this outcome, it would be easy to say that it has failed. But if we look at however it affected the Syrian mentality, how we see now even loyalists who calls for demonstrations, who use the social medias to voice their concerns, even if they are not ready today to uprise against Bashar al-Assad or other forms of authoritarian rule, we've seen a change in how they seek their demands. And this induced change will also eventually open new communication channels and maybe build momentum for a gradual movement and change from the bottom to the up, while encouraging local initiatives, while attacking this very central statistic view of governing in Syria and in the region, and which, in my opinion, doesn't work. And we'll find an alternative that is much more stable and much more sustainable in terms of appeasing the grievances, different grievances, and sometimes also colluding grievances, and hopefully build a common project for everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Hatahet, for this realist interpretation of the situation in Syria. And Dr. Hatahet just underlined the crossed red lines, the unheard demands, the lost lives, displaced people, and all these miseries of Syria. Yet he also reminded us that this is not a final failure yet. There is still an ongoing process. He described Turkey as the last standing supporter of the revolution in Syria, and he addressed the local grassroots and local initiatives evolving into the national scale to retrigger and the process and to reach the long-expected outcome of change in Syria. And with that, now we proceed to our second panelist of the night, who is Emadeddin Badi. Mr. Badi is a Libyan independent consultant and researcher that specializes in governance, post-conflict stabilization, hybrid security, and peace building. He currently works as a senior analyst at the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime and is also a non-resident senior fellow with the Middle East program at the Atlantic Council, where he focuses primarily on the US and European policies towards Libya. Mr. Badi, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Hussein. Thank you to everyone before me as well for all of your great points. I'll try and build on a little bit on what Tawakkol and my previous colleague that focused on the Syrian kind of revolution and its outcomes have, and the points they made, basically. I think overall, one takeaway from 2011 is about the revolutions of 2011 is we need to be humble about what we label as realism sometimes, because we often get caught up in thinking about things realistically. And 2011 have proved that sometimes that's not really the right framework to analyze developments, and that the protests or the eruption of them were unpredictable, and no one expected the situation to, first of all, turn out the way they did back then, but also turn out a decade later the way they are now. Another takeaway is perhaps when authoritarianism and when authoritarian regimes appear most resilient is when they are sometimes most vulnerable as well. That's I would say the case, particularly in Libya. And overall, if the past decade has somewhat proven anything, is that we can trust authoritarians to somewhat keep repeating the same mistakes, albeit in new forms, that they did before, because that's the only thing that they know how to do, and that's the only, let's say, blueprint for governance that they know. Maybe in terms of the Libyan revolution, I'll differentiate it perhaps a little bit, at least, from the other ones. In Libya, from my perspective at least, the main galvanizing kind of factor for protests to erupt weren't necessarily economic factors. At least those didn't feature prominently as the main kind of factor that influenced the eruption of the revolution as such. I think the main factor in Libya was actually that there was a very visible, very almost palpable, but something that people didn't really want to almost talk about due to the culture of political repression that Gaddafi had. There was a glass ceiling for justice and accountability. And that had carried away over time. It stemmed from long-standing grievances and a total absence of justice that compiled over decades of Gaddafi's rule, whether it be massacres, like particular events, or even state-led policies. And that's also particularly why a lot of people in Libya, at least, or some of those that were involved in the revolution, reject this notion that it was an Arab Spring, because a lot of the constituencies that kind of participated in the revolution were also not very happy with Gaddafi's veiled pan-Arabist aspirations through which he consolidated his rule. So that's part of the reason why also this labeling of it as an Arab Spring in Libya with certain minorities is particularly contentious. But back to the initial point that I wanted to make is the economic factors featured less prominently as a galvanizing factor for protest and aspirations for justice and accountability. And this somewhat conflated with an anti-authoritarian stance. Why? Because the aspirations kind of for justice, for rule of law, for accountability, and for some form of transparent governance, and for reforms at large, those were viewed as completely antithetical with the form of personalized rule that Gaddafi or even anyone else would have had afterwards. So that's part of the reason why perhaps our revolution was slightly different, in that justice was perhaps one of the main kind of factors that influenced the protest eruption. And I think this is a dynamic that hasn't necessarily been captured a lot, and something that hasn't been focused on, in whether it be in policy circles or in the discourse at large. A decade on, obviously, that's no longer even part of the policy debate. And as Tawakkol mentioned, human rights aren't really a priority, so the issue of accountability is kind of swept under the rug in favor of shady political deals brokered in foreign capitals, etc. But maybe we can stick to a 30,000-foot point of view, and we can dig deeper in the Q&A afterwards on what I'm talking about here. If I can oversimplify a little bit the dynamics in the past decade or so, I'd say that it relates to the point you mentioned earlier. The main kind of factor that has or the main kind of rift that has affected the Libyan revolution and its trajectory is the emergence of kind of a revolutionary sort of current that embraced the political change sweeping through the region, and another counter-revolutionary current that wanted to artificially either sustain or artificially recreate the status quo ante. And this artificial recreation or sustention of the status quo was often done through violent means, whereas the embrace of kind of the revolutionary change was often done through transnational networks and through brokering, let's say, political deals and building those networks, kind of. I think where we perhaps didn't do well as Libyans is that ultimately, after the ouster of Gaddafi, the Libyan political elite stopped short when it came to altering the governance structure that he had left and that he had designed over his decades-long rule. We ended up in a situation where we had kind of various internal camps, either claiming to represent a particular geographic, ideological, or a particular geographic locale, or a constituency, or a political ideology. And these essentially weren't focused on building consensus amongst them. As soon as Gaddafi was dead, they fought over the levers of his state. I think in many ways this speaks to the amount or the influence that Gaddafi had over the political culture writ large, in that really there was no one that was able to imagine, even without Gaddafi being there, there was no one that was able to imagine a state that wasn't really structured in the way that he had left it. So what we had instead of after the revolution is basically a system that was hollowed out, broken, somewhat worked had Gaddafi been there still, but was bound to almost fragment, institutionally weaken, and really not work with him being absent. Another thing that we had is also a greedy political elite, whether they be affiliated with the revolutionary or the counter-revolutionary current, because their greed really opened up Libya for foreign exploitations. And unlike, let's say, Tunisia, which is perhaps the blueprint for how a revolution can, to an extent, succeed or a democratic transition be achieved, they really didn't focus on engaging in genuine, let's say, pluralistic consensus building, etc. Now, today, when you look at the landscape, obviously it's starkly different than the way it was in 2012 and 2013. In 2012 and 2013, we had actual elections. Things were going moderately well to an extent, albeit we did have some dysfunctional kind of policies at the level of politics, and we did have a degradation at the level of security, but things weren't as bad as they were now, and there wasn't the level of kind of blatant foreign interventionism that we have today. Now it's kind of escalated in this precarious geostrategic competition for influence with, on the one hand, the UAE, Egypt, Russia, and perhaps even, I'll put that in there, France, against, on the other hand, Qatar and Turkey. And this kind of globalization of the Libyan civil war, so to speak, isn't new. It is kind of traced. It can be traced back to what was already an internationalized kind of NATO intervention in 2011, which garnered most of the media attention, but kind of obfuscated the fact that a lot of these states, most of them really, had already been engaged in a covert scramble for influence through their own Libyan proxies. And I'll single out here the UAE and Qatar as kind of the leaders in the counter-revolutionary versus revolutionary alliances, because they had very divergent views over the blueprint for governance that would sweep through the region post-Arab Spring, quote unquote. And as time passed, not only did the kind of Libyan differences compound and grew starkly more apparent, the differences between these two states also starkly grew more and more apparent. And this inflicted rifts on Libya's political, social, and military spheres, because a lot of the Libyan political elite grew gradually disconnected from their constituencies, and more were inclined to actually accommodate foreign agendas. And that's part of the reason why we have the reality that we have today. Now, what the kind of camps looked like back in 2011, 2012-13, is that you had a variety of groups that were kind of unified in their absolute refusal to engage in with any remnant of the Gaddafi regime, a dynamic which was almost akin to paranoia or insecurity, but yet almost counterintuitively, what they also did was try and control the levers of Gaddafi's state. On the other end of the spectrum, you had another alliance that was self-perceived themselves sometimes as technocrats or self-labeled as liberals, many of which had worked with Gaddafi or his son Saif al-Islam, who was being groomed to rule back then. And they had stayed close to countries which they had retreated to before the revolution, mainly I would say Egypt and the UAE. This split, or these two networks, so to speak, and the differences between them really toxified Libyan politics. And in a fragile and kind of nascent period where they gradually accommodated foreign agendas more and more, that meant that there was no effective political direction. And sometimes the even very, very silly, I would say, decisions were viewed in very zero-sum terms, and essentially gradually opened us more and more to foreigners intervening on behalf of their Libyan kind of proxies. Now, the figurehead that kind of emerged as the face of the counter-revolutionary current in Libya is Khalifa Haftar, whom you know and have referred to earlier. And I think it speaks volumes, the fact that he kind of he had a very marginal role in 2011, but was able primarily through foreign support to really create the patchwork of militias that he has labeled since then the Libyan National Army or the Libyan Arab Armed Forces. And you can clearly see in the reference to Arab armed forces a return to to this idea of pan-Arab nationalism, and it's something that is really influenced in the messaging, and that's part of the reason why earlier I pointed out that this kind of labeling of it as an Arab Spring is a contentious issue in Libya. Now, the let's say the all or nothing moment, and I would say the moment where Libya returned to the headlines since 2011 was last year. Before that, no one, aside for ISIS and maybe migration-focused media coverage, no one really focused on Libya until Khalifa Haftar decided to launch his offensive on Libya's capital, Tripoli, with Emirati backing, with political backing from the French, and even to a degree covert military backing from Paris as well. And ultimately also in August of last year with a direct intervention of Russian mercenaries to support his faltering war effort because he hadn't succeeded in what he envisioned as a kind of quick blitzkrieg that would return Libya to authoritarianism had failed. And this is also when Turkey decided to activate, or what were already, I would say, dormant networks, or networks of dormant political and military backing, which it had since 2000, I would say, 12. Turkey has been involved in Libya since then, but it hasn't been nearly as overtly involved as it has been since, I would say, December or November of 2019, really. And now what we have essentially is this fight over what the regional order would look like and what the kind of revolutionary or counter-revolutionary blueprint for governance and what the kind of outcome of the Arab Spring, quote unquote, could look like in Libya is being fought over in Libya. It's being fought over by regional states in Libya. However, what's perhaps new in terms of dynamics is the involvement of Russia, because it doesn't have this particular ideology that embraces one or the other blueprint, and that's part of the reason why now it's a different ball game altogether. I'll leave it at that, and maybe we can tackle more of what I said in the Q&A afterwards.
Thank you, Mr. Badi, for highlighting that the revolution in Libya was not primarily economy-oriented, but justice was a prevailing demand in Libya. And now, as Mr. Badi highlighted, Gaddafi is long gone, yet the governing elites are still struggling to dismantle the previous political structure and to create a pluralistic political consensus. Yet now, more and more, Libya is becoming a tension point between the local and international alliances, between revolutionary and counter-revolutionary ballgame, as Mr. Badi put it. And with that, now we are turning to our last speaker of the night, Professor Ahmet Uysal. Professor Uysal is a political sociologist interested in studying Arab affairs and Turkish-Arab relations. He is the general coordinator of Center for Middle Eastern Studies, ORSAM. Professor Uysal received his master's and doctoral degrees in the Southern Illinois University, USA, and he has coordinated several Arab-Turkish congresses of social sciences since 2010. And he wishes to advance academic cooperation among Turkey and Arab world. He follows the developments in Turkey and Arab world and works to improve understanding and cooperation at academic and social levels. He writes and comments on Turkish and the Middle Eastern affairs in national and international platforms. Professor Uysal, the floor is yours, and we are expecting to hear your comments on Turkey's perspective on the Arab Spring.
Thank you, Dr. Hussein, and I'm happy to be with you, and thanks for the invitation and the speakers. And it's been like 10 years now, and the Middle East is not stabilized and settled. So the democratic aspirations, as the many speakers, freedom, dignity, and bread or good living are still alive and did not disappear, but they were hurt in a way to they were being challenged by crisis and conflicts, etc. So the picture is not as bright, but there is hope. So Turkey suffered from also authoritarian rule, especially in the name of Kemalism and ultra-secularism, radical secularism in a way that banned many practices of Islam. But Turkey somehow managed to also keep the democratic door open, despite military coups and interventions. And we realized that there is a direct correlation between democracy and development. And Turkish people went through this process several times, and there became a democratic maturity in a way to appreciate what happened or appreciate the achievements, at least with the democratic government, starting with Menderes and then Özal, and also during the AK Party. And we see also Turkey became maybe an inspiration for Muslim country, can be a developed country with democracy and freedom, and even some kind of some version of secularism. And Turkey showed all these possible in the Muslim world. So Turkey represents a third way between these surrendering or pro-Western governments and also radical movements that reject the whole modernization and Westernization. Turkey is a mix, is a balance between the modernization and also keeping its identity plus and achieving development. So we realized that this model, when Arab Spring erupted, Turkey, of course, did not instigate these protests, but Turkey was very happy to see also other neighbors to become democratized, and Turkey have seen no problem with Arab democratization or the strengthening of Syria or Egypt or others, because we know democracy is when people choose their leaders, they work for their people. When they cannot choose, they work for those who support them. It can be this country or that country, this superpower or that superpower. So weak inside, also weak outside. So it was supported by, if it is supported by foreign powers, so they have to give more concessions and also keep the country. I mean, it is also a natural result that if the government doesn't have enough legitimacy and he cannot serve enough about people, and it is more inclined to corruption and oppression. So there is a direct connection there. And with Turkey, when this Arab Spring erupted, Turkey realized also Turkey maybe wasn't ready, but quickly adopted that these are general aspirations of the Turkish people, and pretty much appreciated what happened. But I don't think there was deep reading of what was going on and the deep state in these countries, and maybe did not pay enough attention to the counter-revolutionary forces. I mean, of course, these countries were a little bit silent, like United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, who are worried about the rising democracy in many Arab countries, and like Yemen, and they were worried about Yemen becoming more independent, not listening to Saudi impositions or implications and imperatives. Similarly, Egypt, when the Egyptian coup happened, Turkey was against it, and Saudi Arabia, of course, there is a leadership competition between Saudi Arabia and Egypt for the Sunni world, or at least for the Arab world, and they would prefer, a weakened Egypt, not a democratic Egypt, but weakened Egypt that needs Saudi support or Western support. And there is kind of this dimension to it. And so these of course, anti-democracy camp, they reorganized also, even cheated the regimes. They did not, when, for example, Morsi went to Saudi Arabia, they did not say, we don't like you, and he was trying to get some funding for Egypt to recover from economic impasse. They didn't reveal much of the dislike toward democratic and also maybe Muslim Brotherhood rule. Turkey is generally, I mean, criticized or claimed that some anti-democracy camp, they claim they are fighting Muslim Brotherhood or political Islam in a way, but this is not true. They are fighting democracy, and they are fighting all kinds of democracy, either secular democracy or Muslim conservative democracy. They are against it, but they are also disguising and hiding this. And also in the opposite way, they are claiming Turkey is supporting Muslim Brotherhood, and Turkey is part of the Muslim Brotherhood. And this is not true. Turkey is supporting democratic process, not because of the Muslim Brotherhood, but because of the general principle. I mean, in Tunisia, for example, during the Sipsi time, may Allah bless his soul, I mean, a secular government, and Turkey worked fine with, let's say, Tunisian secular government, but there is kind of a attempt to delegitimize Turkey's presence and Turkey's claim for democracy or support for democracy by claiming, I mean, it's being part of the Muslim Brotherhood. Turkey is more like Sufi tradition than more like a Brotherhood tradition. Brotherhood tradition generally mostly has Arabic connotation, and especially with anti-colonization, and one difference that Turkey was never colonized. So Turkey's relation with the West is different than those countries, Arab countries especially, that lived under colonization. And there is, I mean, dialogue with the West is weaker than Turkey. So these analogies and comparisons of the democratically government, Turkey is still, the constitution is a secular constitution, and I mean, claiming of these political Islam and the radicalization by the Gulf is not true. And they have a good relation with more radical groups than Turkey, and they are disguising that. So in this way, there is a struggle for democracy and dignity in the Arab world, and Turkey is siding with the people. Not mostly, Turkey is not promoting democracy. There is, I mean, one distinction we need to make. Turkey is not active like George Bush tried to promote democracy during the early 2000s, but Turkey is not doing that. But Turkey, when there is a big struggle for democracy, like in Syria and Egypt and some other countries like Yemen, Turkey is supporting democracy. And when the Houthis tried to make a coup, and they made already, but Turkey was against the Houthi coup, but Turkey also was against the Sisi coup and other coups or Haftar coup in Libya. So Turkey, in principle, are against the coups because Turkey suffered a lot from the military coups and interventions. And in this way, Turkey is systematic, is more consistent. Also in Bahrain, for example, Turkey side not distinguish between Shia or Sunni demands. Turkey also recognized the valuable demands for democracy in Bahrain. So Turkey was more consistent, more understanding, and maybe against the Houthi coup, but later we understand that also Saudis, they are not after democracy, even though they are against the Houthi coup in Yemen, but they are not actually for democratic transition in Yemen, and similarly in Libya. So we had a natural maybe controversy or kind of discrepancy with the status quo and authoritarian camp, we can say. Of course, we should not despair about democracy, and there is enough hopes, enough indicators, and despair also will help dictators and authoritarian regimes. They want to force you to submission, and so I mean, despair and surrendering is not good. And we know Obama, he said red line or this line, that line in Syria. He blew it. He just let them alone, let them down. I think Biden, maybe administration, can take a different approach because there are serious differences now, serious challenges. He might pay attention, but we cannot count on him because he was the vice president of Obama at that time. He knows all the meaning of the developments. But the second round of last 2 years also showed that, as Tawakkol Karman mentioned, you know, in Algeria, we have seen also a second round of Arab Spring with different connotation in different locations, with different tones in different locations, like in Iraq, in Algeria, Sudan, and Lebanon, even some at some level in Egypt. So people's, I mean, aspirations for democracy, for a better life, because in the social media world and global era, people all realize what others are enjoying, and the Arab countries have all the resources and they cannot enjoy. So there is also aspiration, continuing aspirations among Arabs and young, especially young generation. They don't want to listen to these khawana or like treason and all kinds of legitimation, justification of, you know, delaying the reforms, like Assad regime in Turkey, for example. In 5-10 years, Turkey, I mean, achieved a lot. And in Syria, when early 2000 Bashar Assad came to power, 10 years he did nothing. So people kind of get despaired, but Syrian people paid a big price because they already toppled the Assad regime 3 times, with Turkey's support or without. I mean, it was on the verge of falling, the Assad regime. Hezbollah came to rescue, and wasn't enough. Iran came to rescue, wasn't enough. ISIS came to rescue. As you know, ISIS toppled the Sunni opposition rather than the Assad regime, and also it wasn't enough. Then Russia came to rescue the Assad regime, and now it is open to all kind of discussion. But in Turkey, especially related to Syria, Turkey, in the one hand, supporting democracy, but and try to alleviate the suffering of Syrian people, but on the other hand, try to secure the security of its southern borders, because we have a long border with Syria, and we don't want the PKK and PYD state happen there, and it's like a siege on Turkey. So we cannot accept a Kurdish border, not any Kurdish state, but it's a PKK state. It is a proxy. It becomes a proxy for America, and we don't want another Israel in our southern borders. So especially Turkey intervened with this regard in Syria, try to secure these the happening of cantonate and then small state or pseudo states in the south, and then pose a threat to Turkey, and Turkey intervened because of that. And in Libya, Turkey intervened because of the invitation by the legitimate government, because the coup process was going on. But we should give also the appreciation to the Libyan people in Trablus that refused and resisted the coup or the taking over by Haftar for a long time. So it was a serious struggle, and Turkey's help, even small help, affected the situation on the ground. Generally, they mentioned Turkey's military intervention, but Turkey's role, also diplomatic support for a legitimate government, for the legitimate government in Libya, the Accord government, helped a lot. Turkey knew the difference between, or kind of a competition between France and Italy, and Russia and America, and some European priorities. Let's say France wants more focus on Libya, but Germany wants to focus on Eastern Europe and stuff. So Turkey also provided a legal and diplomatic support for Libyan revolution, Libyan aspirations, and Turkey, now we can say they prevented. The fight is not over. The problem is not solved yet, but Turkey is for a diplomatic and political solution in Libya. Plus, Turkey also try to support the legitimate government. It is up to Libyans, of course, but we should not tie the hands of the good one or democratic ones, and also try to secure its interests in the Eastern Mediterranean and also in the region, because there is an attempt also to push away Turkey from the Eastern Mediterranean, and this is not acceptable. And we see, as Turkey in the last point, we see, I mean, the Arab people are punished because of their aspiration for democracy and for a better life. They were punished and to choose and to be silent with military coups, civil wars, conflicts, sectarian conflicts, terror and poverty and misery, economic pressure, etc. Of course, some of them Turkey is also punished, but at the end Turkey is strong, and Arab people suffered, but I don't think they will give up on their aspiration. They realize also, like Yemeni people are punished because they want democracy, but without democracy, I mean, having this one's proxy or the other country's proxy is not going to solve Yemeni's problem. Similar in Libya, but we know also these authoritarianism or anti-democracy camp also, they don't want a unity. They want divisions more in these neighboring countries. There is a project. I mean, they support the division in mostly. I mean, in Yemen, in Libya, in Syria. Unfortunately, I mean, Arab world is divided enough, and they want to divide more to make the big countries, big powers, be more comfortable in this region. But this is not going to help. And Turkey's policy also to keep the unity of these countries, especially Syria, unity of Syria and unity of Iraq, unity of Libya are very, we see it good for the local people, Libyan people, for example, and good for Turkey. We don't want more divisions. There is already 22 countries in the Arab League, and having more will not help. I think we need more unity and cooperation among Arabs, and in the region also regional cooperation. And one last thing also, Turkey supports regional solutions to regional problems like Yemeni crisis or Syrian crisis. It is better to solve them regionally. If Saudi Arabia and Iran is fighting, for example, in Yemen, it's better for them to solve it among themselves. Any solution imposed from outside will neither serve Saudi Arabia or nor Iran. Similarly, in Libya, also in Syria, and in Syria, we know Turkey tried hard to convince Iran to stop supporting Assad regime and stop the bloodshed, and then but Iran did not come close. But Turkey, when they started with Putin and Russia, Iranians joined. Now they are happy that at least there is not much fighting. They began to appreciate, but we need this regional dialogue and regional kind of de-escalation further and more. So Turkey's vision, I think, is more constructive and more humane, more acceptable overall. And I don't buy the Turkey is supporting only political Islam and only for the Turkey is pragmatic, not just to summarize, not promoting democracy, but if they have to choose a side, they support the democratic aspirations and demands by the majority people. So, plus also Turkey tries to stay away from sectarianism that also hurt many countries like Syria, Yemen, and even hurting Iraq and now and maybe Lebanon. So try to be away from the sectarian mentality. So we'll see more. I think Turkey will be a player in these conflicts. Will have more to say as a medium power in the region. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Uysal, for summarizing the ups and downs of the Arab Spring in different corners from Tunisia to Yemen, with a particular focus on Turkey's involvement in the process. And Professor Uysal stated that although Turkey is being portrayed as a sponsor of political Islam for the Arab Spring, to despise, to delegitimize Turkey's involvement and the Arab Spring itself, the truth is, for Professor Uysal, is Turkey is looking for regional solutions for this regional problem. And with that, I thank for all our speakers for the night, and we can proceed to the QA session. Throughout the speech, I have seen multiple questions on the comment section, and I will read the questions one by one. If the question is not directed toward a particular speaker, I will direct it to the most related speaker myself. And while we are doing this QA session, our audience can also continue to type their questions on the comments section of their Periscope, YouTube, or Facebook medias. And I'm reading the first question, which comes from Shema. I'm reading the question, and I think this question will be directed to Mr. Sinan Hatahet. This is a question on Lebanon, and here we have a fellow Syrian with us, so I think that might be the correct address for it. What do you think about Lebanon as part of the revolutions in the area? Does the political system can change in the country, or we have to talk about some reforms?
Sorry. Yes, thank you for this very important question. And I think the Lebanese themselves are asking themselves this question every day. The current political system is the offshoot, the result of Taif agreements following the Lebanese civil war, and it is built over an alliance or a coalition between the different political parties and families, because this is also very important to understand in the Lebanese context, that the political parties are synonym of political families. And today the average Lebanese citizen has very little maneuver to do without affiliating himself either to one family or the other. I think that the Lebanese uprising could only succeed if it attacks the whole system of this cohabitation between these different parties, including the parties that so-called parties of opposition, because themselves would only change the faces of how the regime works and how the state works. So it is a very challenging discourse for the Lebanese people, and it becomes even more challenging when it has Syria next door, because Syria next door is not only synonym of chaos, but it's also synonym of a Syrian regime who has played and still is an active actor in how the Lebanese domestic politics are being done and being conducted, and without also forgetting the intervention of Iran and also Saudi Arabia with different actors. So to sum up, I think it is a little bit too early to describe the Lebanese uprising as a revolution. It is one of the toughest terrain, and it can only succeed if it touches base and it challenges the whole notion of this cohabitation among these families and parties on which the Ta'if agreement has been built over.
Thank you, Mr. Dr. Hatahet. And the second question goes for our second speaker, for Mr. Badi. And this question comes from Murat Sahlul. Let me put it to a question form briefly. I will a little bit paraphrase it. So it was a surprise, the fall of the Morsi regime in Egypt. It was a surprise. However, it was also a surprise that we saw a chain of outbreaks of new revolutions in Algeria and Sudan, and even in Lebanon and Iraq. So can we say that the Arab Spring, the revolution, is still growing?
Yeah, I mean, the dynamics that really, although maybe perhaps they have changed to an extent. You referred earlier to the Lebanese kind of protests. I think the Lebanese were very wary of being involved in the protests in 2011 for several different reasons. The dynamics are slightly similar in terms of other states that neighbor Libya, about whether they wanted to engage back then in protests or not. Obviously, all these decisions are also sometimes based on geography, sometimes based on opportunity cost, rationality. In Libya, they were also partly influenced by the kind of reaction to Gaddafi's approach to repressing the protests, really. And you can clearly see that those that approach the protests with violence, that has somewhat backfired on them. I don't know if Assad is particularly happy with the outcome of the Syrian kind of conflict. Perhaps he is, since constituencies don't really matter to him, clearly. But I think a lot of the other authoritarians have somewhat learned lessons from that and have learned to approach things differently. And I think also the COVID pandemic has proven to be an opportunity in a way, because a lot of the policies can be institutionalized. A lot of the policies that kind of stalled protests or offset them can be institutionalized on the basis of pandemic response rather than repressing protests. But either way, all the underlying reasons for why protests would erupt are still there, and are even worse than they were before. Add to that, I think, the kind of very, very problematic proxy dynamics that now exist across theaters in the Middle East and North Africa, in this scramble for influence over between, let's say, regional states and old recrudescent empires, including Russia, for example, which shouldn't be forgotten from this equation. So no, I wouldn't look at it as the Arab Spring continuing. I would just look at it as state-society relations in the different countries still being very, very much fractured, and this fragmentation still existing, and that is leading to frustration. How this manifests itself, whether it be through, I mean, protests are really the organic expression of that, when the opportunity cost is viewed as favorable to do that. And the problem is, I think, for a lot of, even in Libya, for example, is you had some protests in the past year or so, but the problem is the opportunity cost is now far higher than it was before, because going out and protesting when everyone has a gun is problematic. And I will say that in 2011, at least, after Gaddafi had consolidated his rule for 42 years or so, the, let's say, overt expressions of oppression weren't there. So it's not like people were it's not like people were acutely aware, especially young ones, of the extent of repression that he would be able to exhibit. And I think a lot of people were also shocked with the fact that Saif al-Islam, even his son that was being groomed, that was supposedly a liberal, etc., went out and said, "Oh, well, we're probably, yeah, we'll kill you all," basically. And they were very hard line about their approach to this. So now people that were 20-year-olds or even 15-year-olds back then that remember that, who are now 25-year-olds, they're acutely aware of the opportunity cost of going out and protesting, and I think that's part of the reason why there's still a barrier on that front. However, in another 10 years, I think there will be a generation that will de facto have far less to lose from going out and protesting, and it's undeniable that the kind of most of the states, in most of the kind of our region states, the population is getting younger. So this kind of barrier or this generational divide, so to speak, between the authoritarian rulers that are growing increasingly old and the kind of younger generation that is increasingly connected to the world, increasingly has an awareness of what democratic norms, what transparency, what justice, what other kind of governance blueprints exist in the world, and that also travel and see that. I think this discrepancy in kind of mindsets will widen over time.
Thank you, Mr. Badi. The next question comes from Ayşe Bozkurt to Professor Ahmet Uysal. And the question is, what do you think about authority vacuum after the Assad regime? The situation can be dangerous for Turkey. In other words, is any authority better than no authority in Syria?
Yeah, it's a good question. And actually, Assad doesn't have any authority. Assad cannot rule 2/3 of the country. He cannot control. On one side, there is Americans and PYD action. On the other hand, there is Turkey controlled and sponsored areas in the north. And Iran is there, Russia is there to say the final word. So there is a vacuum already that's filled by other powers. And Assad regime, lost the legitimacy, killed 1 million. And how worse it can get. And the country doesn't have any money. America is controlling the oil and with PYD. So actually, it is better that this regime goes and there is a new democratic government that maybe consider the Russian interest and Iranian interest and Western interest, and without fighting, we can solve the problem. There is a democratic process is going on in Syria with the constitution writing. There is a plan by the UN supported plan transition that foresees the writing of constitution and then electing the new government. But Assad regime is trying to delay this as much as possible. Always in Turkish we say, throwing the ball to the outside. So it is on the touchline. They are always trying to throw the ball to the touchline so that they cannot be played. And this is the logic, and I don't see it is a major concern. Of course, Westerners say, there is ISIS and all these are exaggerated. You know how much a balloon was ISIS, just to keep the Assad regime in power. Actually, ISIS is a there is ISIS, but it is overblown, and it is also made up. It was an artificial threat. So I don't see this lack of Assad or lack of authority is a problem. There is already lack of authority. Now we need to have a legitimate authority in Syria. That's the work we should work for. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Uysal. And here is the second round of questions, starting with Dr. Hatahet. The question is, the governance crisis of all the countries in the region leads to fragile societies, which also undermine the Arab uprising. Why do you think that the people in the region couldn't reach a consensus for the purpose of at least better governance, where there is no consensus for better governance?
Well, yeah, there is two set of reasons. There are reasons that are related to the authority in place, the authoritarian regimes, do everything possible in their capacity to prevent any kind of consensus building among the people. This is true in Syria, this is true in Egypt, this is true everywhere. And this is mainly condoned through the state institutions, once again, that are hostage to these regimes. This is how they use the police state apparatus, how they use also the other state apparatus into preventing this kind of alternatives. And we can spend long hours detailing the different tactics implemented by different regimes and how they are very creative actually in coming up with ways to further divide their constituent societies. But there is also another set of reasons which is deeper and has its roots. We can witness this in Syria, also in the Levant in general, but also we can see several similar traits in Libya and Yemen, where we see there is a set of complex grievances and sometimes competing grievances. We see the urban versus the rural, also tribal kind of competition, the north versus the south, sectarian division. And even though democracy could bring solutions for coexistence, for creating a national narrative that can, gather everyone around it. This comes with different level of maturities, not during a conflict, where every needs is put on the line. And it's very normal to see people acting to protect their own narrow identities. And this is what we've seen in Syria in several cases. So I wouldn't be alarmed too much saying that this cannot be changed. It definitely can change. We've seen several eras in the recent history of the Arab world where the people have overcame these divisions, but we cannot take them lightly. They exist, and the only way to transform them into a power of diversity and also power of unity is when they all work together for a common project. Democracy is only the expression of this common project. The common project is much deeper. It's a social contract. It's as how we interact with our neighbors. It's how we interact with our regional order, and we cannot just overburden the people to change everything with a magic wand called this a revolution. This is type of transformations that are generational, that needs time. And we've seen this, for example, in Turkey. And Professor Ahmed has mentioned how this has been gone over several decades. He mentioned Menderes, Özal, and then coming to the AK Party. This came through waves, and we cannot just shortcut the Arab uprising, or even the change towards democracy in the Arab world with 10 years only. This will take time, and we need to be patient.
Thank you, Dr. Hatahet. And the next question is for Mr. Badi. This is a question directly on Libya. Do you think, and this question comes from Ayşe Aydın, by the way, do you think Haftar is following the footsteps of Gaddafi? And do you think he is trying to portray himself as a fighter, leader who is fighting against terrorism, imperialism, such a jargon? Do you see some similarities in his ways to hijack the revolution in a Gaddafi style, let's call it?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely an argument to be made about Haftar being somewhat of a caricature of Gaddafi. I personally look at it as more of a poor man's Gaddafi, really, in that he's 75 plus, ailing, really, almost dying, and he's trying to achieve everything, or replicate, really clumsily, everything that Gaddafi tried to do, but instead of kind of going through with a more organic process or institutional process where it's a divide and rule system, he's primarily relying on foreign support to kind of short circuit the system and save time. But he's caught up in a race against that, because he doesn't have the time to consolidate, first of all, his rule. Second of all, the Libya that he is trying to recreate, the Libya that was under Gaddafi, has proven not to be a system that is resilient in the first place, and that it has previously collapsed. So there are several problematic facets there. Then the other facet that is also problematic is that there's only, I think, the amount of violence that is being unleashed on the population writ large in order for him to achieve this has over the past, I would say, particularly since 2019, has made really the narrative that he had usually ridden, this narrative of inevitability, this narrative that his army, so-called army, would provide security, etc. It has gradually collapsed as his forces kind of rampage through the country. So yes, he is trying to emulate kind of an authoritarian blueprint that Gaddafi utilized. Sometimes the parallels are almost quite funny, to be honest, in that he's trying to groom sons in the same way Gaddafi did back then. One for politics, two that are involved in the military, one that is slightly dabbling with political Salafism, Salafist ideology, kind of. So, and that's exactly the same thing that Gaddafi did. But where I see the main difference between them being is Gaddafi's kind of rise to power was almost, you could argue, was almost bloodless. His consolidation of rule over time was very much repressive and relied on a process of social engineering, ideology, and institutional weakening and coup-proofing of the Libyan armed forces as such, and creating parallel armed structures, etc. Haftar is basically trying to do all that in 5 to 6 years. I think whatever legacy he leaves behind is going to be quite ugly, and is going to cause the situation to be far worse than it is now, ironically, because really what he has created is an unsustainably a coalition that cannot be sustained without him at its helm, which arguably Gaddafi had done at the level of institution, but he's doing that at the level of really armed coalitions. And what this means is that you won't have politicians that are fighting over the levers of Gaddafi's state like they did in 2011. You will have armed groups that aligned with Haftar that will fight against each other for the foreign support that he was channeling. So people that are fighting over Emirati support, over Russian support, etc. Right now, what Russia is doing is trying to groom potentially other alternative military figures, and Egypt as well, other alternative military figures that they're perhaps more familiar with. We're yet to see whether that effort will succeed, and even if it does, it won't. The coalition that they'll be able to kind of keep together won't resemble what Haftar has at the moment. So that ultimately means that whatever it looks like, it won't look like what it looks like now, and there will be ultimately a level of conflict. It's just a matter of how much damage he'll do before he dies.
Thank you very much. And the last question of the night is for Mr. Uysal. And I will unite two questions, actually. I will unite two questions from Nesim Öztürk, who asks about the divisive agendas of the global and regional powers in Yemen. And despite that, can we still see a united Yemen, despite all this conflict of regional and global powers? And as a follow-up from Büşra Akyüz, the question is, what is the role of women for the next round, next wave of Arab Spring, if there will be a second wave? Please.
Yes, good questions. And we two sides for the divisive nature. Yemenis, even though some countries are fueling sectarianism and provoking sectarianism, Yemenis actually they don't want to be divided and they don't want to suffer like before. But of course, international intervention, regional intervention, make them suffer. And one problem that is done, like Libya, these authoritarian regimes, even the coup regimes, they kind of destroy any kind of leadership, popular leadership that can emerge as a uniting fashion. And we have seen assassinations and of young people in Libya, in Yemen also, with the UAE support mostly. But Yemen is, I mean, still it's not too late to unite Yemen. And I don't, especially there is difference between the UAE. UAE wants to divide Yemen, but when it is divided, it's going to be divided like 3-4 pieces, which is not good for Saudi Arabia, because also in this, there emerge a Houthi-led Shiite country. Saudis don't want that on their border. And but they don't take also a strong stance against the UAE's divisive projects. Of course, the UAE is also aligned with Israel and with the West, but you know, they are doing the dirty work with, in the name of the West. So Yemen is exposed to division, but there is still hope if there is real project or real effort to unite or keep Yemen united. I think Yemenis don't like division overall, but of course it is not a easy task. Women question is also very important because women suffer the most with these suffering, with these poverty, with lack of education, with all kinds of developmental issues. Women suffer the most in the Arab world, even when there are enough, even before the Arab Spring, when there are a lot of poverty, you know, the boys go outside the country and, you know, they try to find their way in Europe, in the West, in America, etc. And this migration mostly is a male migration. And women also, if they study, they cannot find job. If they find job, they cannot marry. And with the poverty and oppression, they are the real sufferers of these projects. That's why of these policies. That's why women took a strong stance against oppressive regimes like Mubarak or Ali Abdullah Saleh, and Mr. Karman is one of them, that the women played a major role also to challenging these authoritarian regimes, and they still have a role to play to stop these regimes, because sometimes women also represent the moderate but a stronger message. You know, they don't take it to streets so easily, but when they took it, you know, it means there is a serious problem, and it helps to
to boost the morale and to boost the dynamics. We know women were very active in Algerian protests, in Sudanese protests, in Lebanese, even in Iraqi protests. So women are in the Arab world and in overall are taking more vocal roles in these protests and in demands for change, political or social or economic change. Women also are an active part of the dynamic or these machinery of change in the Arab world. So women will be more also important in the future for these pushing for change. I mean.
Thank you very much, Professor Uysal. And with that, we come to the conclusion of our panel for tonight. I thank all three very distinguished presenters for today. And I also thank our keynote speakers, Professor Ataman and Ms. Karman, for their participation to this event. And also I thank the audience for their attention and for these thought-provoking questions. Thank you.